So, guys, welcome, Kate, Lisa, and David. I see we're all here, so I suggest we kick off with today's meeting. The purpose is to have a look at what we've done so far on our group assignment. So, what's on the agenda? First of all, let's discuss and review our blogs once again, but very briefly. And secondly, we will zoom in on the progress we've made so far on the paper and the presentation. But first the blogs. Lisa, could you start by telling us what your blogs were about again?
For example, I found a video by Milton Friedman, and he is saying that the minimum wage is actually an anti-black law. I also found an article about the VRT, who is imposing quota to hire more black people, as a matter of fact. And I think it's a good initiative, and this is what I wrote about in my blogs.
Well, it was indeed interesting, but as you know, we totally disagree on this point because, in my opinion, positive discrimination is still discrimination and thus unethical. And by imposing quotas or introducing quotas is not an effective way to reduce discrimination or inequalities between racial groups or between genders.
Well, David, if I may come in here, I actually agree with Risa. I know positive discrimination might not be the ideal way to exclude discrimination, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
That's true.
Well, let's say that it's obvious that we've acquainted a lot of inspiration from our blogs. In fact, I do believe that the inspiration helped us to develop the research question, namely, what are the consequences of the achievement gap between white and Afro-American students on their labor market perspectives. Now, this brings us directly to the second part of this meeting, namely progress paper presentation. Let's start with the paper. David.
Yes, indeed. So, as you all know, we've split up in two teams. So, you two have been working on the presentation, while Raïs and I have been working on the paper. So, in fact, I think we're almost finished. We started, of course, with the introduction. We briefly pointed out our research question, and then we focused on what exactly is the achievement gap, and specifically in the USA. Then thirdly, we analyzed the consequences of this achievement gap on the labor market perspectives, as we see in our research question. And then finally, we provide some solutions or possible solutions to this achievement gap. And finally, we give a conclusion, of course, for our paper.
Yes, as a matter of fact, the conclusion is all we have to do pretty much now. We really wanted to make a link between the achievement gap and the racial labor market gap, our original topic. And we also really want to point out some solutions, because we all agree that this achievement gap is something that really needs to be banned from the world. And we found some interesting state policies, for example, in Wisconsin. And I think it's really becoming an interesting paper.
Sounds great. I just wonder, what about figures? Do you think you have a sufficient amount of graphics in the paper?
Well, I wouldn't worry about that, because up till now I think we have about 5 graphics in our paper. And if we want, we can really find a huge amount of them on the internet. In papers, in articles, in research articles. There's really plenty of them.
So our paper is going okay, but I heard you guys had an interesting idea for the presentation. How is that coming?
Well,
we did.
We actually did. We started out with an economic theory, which is very good because we can apply it to the things that we are at the university, and we draw a link between the economic theory and teachers, and the way teachers influence the achievement gap. Also, something you mentioned in the paper. And yeah, I'm really happy about that, and I think we have a very interesting perspective with that, especially with the economic theory, but I suppose I should let Peter explain that, because it was his idea.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the interesting thing about the model is that it's been illustrated by a graph. So for me, I think it would be really good to put the graph into the presentation. The model itself provides some kind of motive why discrimination in companies or enterprises could be a rational thing to do. But, well, what do you think about integrating a model into the presentation?
Well, I think since the paper and presentation have to be radically different in style, that this economic model is really something, a good idea to use in the presentation. Yes, I'm in.
Well, I'm not really sure about this. I mean, it's still an economic theory. Wouldn't it be a bit too complex for our public? They're not all economists, so they may have troubles understanding the presentation.
Well, we can try to keep it simple, to keep it as simple as possible.
Yes, that's true. We're going to keep it as basic as possible and really explain all the things our audience has to know, and I'm sure they'll understand it. It will be very clear.
Okay, that's okay for me.
Okay, now this all sounds quite good, but there's, would you like to say something? Okay.
Actually, the progress on the presentation is also very good because we're almost done. I heard you saying that the conclusion is actually all you need. Well, in our case, it's pretty much the same. We have to conclude a bit, maybe polish up the details a bit, but other than that, I think we're almost ready with the presentation. What do you say, Dieter?
Okay, it sounds good to me, but there's one question that arises to me, mainly whether we will keep on working like this, I mean in separate groups or not.
Well, I think we're doing great the way we are right now. And the economic model sounds very interesting, but for us it would be a little bit too complex to get into the material perhaps, and we could never know as much about this as you do at this moment. So perhaps I suggest we could just continue the way we're doing it right now.
I couldn't agree more.
I don't agree on this point with you because right now, Dieter and I know about almost everything about the presentation, and you only know the basics, and it goes the other way around with the paper. So I think it might be a good idea to change the teams a bit and each get to know each other's project a bit.
Now, if I may come in here, personally, if I may say so, I tend to favor the view that it would be better this way because I think it would be too complex and it would take too much time to reorganize all these things.
I agree. I mean, we started something, let's finish it. So we started the paper, and I think we can almost finish the paper. So let's stay with Dieter and finish your job.
All right, I understand your point of view, so I
so
guess we should keep
we'll
it this
keep
way.
the system. Good. Then, well, I believe this will do. I must thank you all for coming, and well, let's have lunch.
Thank you. Especially for the lunch suggestion.